Welcome, everyone. My name is Esther Farmer. We are thrilled to be sharing the amazing work of the Palestinian House of Friendship with you. We're going to do an excerpt from a Readers Theater storytelling project called Wrestling with Zionism. We began planning this event and we were kind of reflecting on the fact that 3 Jewish women have spent the last 10 years supporting the Palestinian House of Friendship. The best thing that we can do is to try to change U.S. policy here. So we decided that one of the ways to do this is to touch people's hearts and minds with stories that have not been heard, the stories of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian Jews that we never hear about in this country. So we created the storytelling project, which was originally a book of mostly Jewish stories called Confronting Zionism. Now it's a play that includes Palestinian and Jewish stories. We performed this Readers Theater several times throughout the city, and we're thrilled that it is contributing to the change in the narrative around Israel-Palestine. So without further ado, here is an excerpt from Wrestling with Zionism.
I am obsessed with Palestine. I don't just mean I love the olive groves and the people and the land and the smell of jasmine and cardamom coffee in the morning. I'm obsessed with the geography of Palestine. Growing up in New York, I was told over and over again that I didn't exist. My people didn't exist. Palestine didn't exist. So I searched for it. I searched for Palestine on every map and globe I could find. I knew it was there. I had visited many times. However, my search for proof was to no avail. Until one day, I happened upon an old globe in the library of Brooklyn Technical High School. I looked at it carefully. I was sure I was not going to see what I was looking for. However, to my joy and satisfaction, there it was, a small strip of land between Egypt and Lebanon and Jordan, labeled Palestine.
I was born in Romania during World War II. I grew up in Tel Aviv, spent years in a kibbutz, and was part of the socialist Zionist youth movement. As a liberal Zionist, I felt strongly connected to Israel and prided myself on my progressive values. I was against wars, racism, and discrimination. I didn't know how much I didn't know. My education, or I should say my indoctrination, began in first grade. Starting every Friday, before dismissal, the teacher used to pass around the blue box, asking for donation, which were mandatory, to the Jewish National Fund, the JNF. We were forever being told the JNF was reclaiming the desert, planting trees, creating parks. We had no idea that these parks were built on the ruins of Palestinian towns and villages. We were told the Arabs were lazy cultivators and neglected the land. When you look at the Palestinian villages and beautiful terraced farms, they are an integral part of the landscape, unlike the settlements which look like they sprout out of nowhere. When you see some cactus on the land, you can be sure there used to be a Palestinian farm there.
My family were prosperous farmers and merchants when the Nakba in 1948 occurred. I was 8 years old. We went from living on a thriving farm to being refugees in camps. And then we became stateless, homeless people. My family tried to stay in our country, moving from place to place. Every time the Zionists bombed a city, we moved to another city. In 1951, the United Nations rented camps in Jordan for the Palestinian refugees for 99 years. It has been 70 years since then. Before the camps, we lived in Ramla, a city in central Palestine between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. We lived in peace, and Muslims, Jews, and Christians worked together and celebrated each other's holidays.
My father was born in Hebron, Palestine. His father, my grandfather, was a Turkish Jew who went to Palestine to avoid serving in the Turkish army. When Palestine became a Turkish protectorate, he was drafted into the army anyway. As a draft dodger who did not believe in war, his only choice was to emigrate to America. My grandmother had always lived in Palestine. Her father was a pharmacist herbalist. His customers were both Muslims and Jews. They lived peacefully in Palestine with none of the angst that European Jews experienced. In fact, my grandmother used to always say, Jews had no problems with Muslims until the British got involved. We lived together, we helped each other, we were friends and neighbors.
After the Balfour Declaration, everything changed. Palestine was partitioned, and although the Zionists got almost 60% of the land, they wanted more. In July 1948, the Zionists occupied Lod. People in Lod got ready for the war because they knew that the Zionists would attack them. But the surprise was that the Zionist army was disguised in Jordanian army uniforms, and the Jordanian flags were on their tanks. The people thought they were getting help from Jordan. But it was Israel that made this plan to kill them. The village fell after fierce house-to-house fighting. During and after the battle for the village, at least 107 Palestinians were killed, including women and children. Some were shot, while others died when hand grenades were thrown into their homes. Apart from the bodies lying in the streets, there were an additional 150 corpses found in one cistern alone. Among them, people who had been either decapitated or disemboweled. Several villages were taken prisoner. I remember a Yemeni Zionist came to a supermarket in Souk al-Nasra and asked the owner if he could leave his bag for 30 minutes. And when the Yemeni guy left, the bag exploded. There was a bomb inside, and many people were killed that day.
We learn the Ashkenazi or European Israeli narrative only. Not a word about the expulsion of the indigenous Palestinians. We had Bible studies 3 to 5 hours a week. The Bible was used as a history document that gives us, the Jewish people, the right to live in the promised land. In other words, a secular society is using a great collection of ancient writings, turning God into a real estate agent. The expulsion of over 700,000 Palestinians and over 400 villages and towns that were razed to the ground and replaced by Jewish towns, villages, and kibbutzim were not part of the story.
The success of the Zionist project is dependent on maintaining the myth that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. Any transgression of this mantra would incur severe consequences. I learned this early on during a trip across the bridge when I was 7 or 8 years old. For most Palestinians in the diaspora, the only way home is through the bridge. Wait, stop. Don't imagine Verrazano. It's not the Golden Gate. It's a few wooden planks atop a puddle that connect the West Bank and the East Bank of the Jordan River. It was an arduous trip back then. Your luggage was dumped and ransacked. Your body was strip searched and patted down. It was true for old or young, man or woman. Do you see how democratic Israel is? In all cases during this particular trip, as a soldier checked our luggage, meaning dumped all of our belongings into these dirty plastic crates, physically handling even the most intimate items, including underwear, he alighted on a small jewelry case. He opened it, and lo and behold, he found a major transgression, something very dangerous and sinister, more threatening than weapons of mass destruction. He found, are you ready for this? A gold charm of the map of Palestine. All of Palestine. Historic Palestine. The Israeli soldier who found the map realized right away what a major crime we had committed. He gave the necklace to my mother and told her, get rid of it. But my mother couldn't get herself to throw away such a precious item. She told my sister to wear the necklace backwards and that it would be hidden by her hair. Of course, it was quickly discovered when we were taken to be physically searched by a female Israeli soldier. She called her superior right away, and in the weeks to come, we would get to know Captain Yaakov very, very well. On his command, we were herded into a room by a number of soldiers brandishing their M16s, and soon enough, my mother was arguing with them, and my sister was screaming, and Captain Yaakov swore to my mother that so long as he was in charge, we would never be allowed to enter. Well, it took 4 trips to the bridge, 2 sets of permits, one of which had to be smuggled out of Palestine by Amti Zarlule, my 60-year-old aunt, the intervention of an amazing Israeli lawyer, Felice Langer, an article in the local newspaper, and my mother's tenacity to finally get us across the bridge that year.
My father always identified as a Palestinian Jew. Many people in the U.S. believe that's an impossibility, a contradiction in terms. Not true. We exist, and more of us than you think. Palestine has always been a country of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. My father was very Jewish and very anti-Zionist. I hear his voice clearly.
Esther, why should the Palestinians suffer and pay for the Holocaust when they had nothing to do with it? And all this stuff about a Jewish state? Do we really need a Jewish state? Jews are nomads. We take culture everywhere. Maybe the United States needs a Jewish state to protect their oil interests. Don't forget, Esther, the U.S. didn't let us in when it mattered. Israel schmizrael. Do you know that the Zionists made deals with Hitler? They don't care about the Jews. They care only about themselves. The Jewish establishment has made a deal with the devil. Nothing good will come of it. Believe me. And what Israel has done to the Palestinians, there's me. I hate to say it, but Israel is doing to the Palestinians what was done to the Jews. Don't talk to me about Zionism.
I am very proud of this voice, a voice that dared to be so different than everything that surrounded us.
After what happened in Lod, my family left Ramla. They moved to a small city nearby called Deir Amar. We left everything, our farms, houses, our businesses. One of my brothers refused to go. He said he would rather sleep under the stars, under the trees. And he took our grandmother and 2 others and went back to Ramla by chariot. On their way, they passed through Lod and found out there was a massacre at Damashmask. The Israeli 89th Commando Battalion, led by Moshe Dayan, occupied Lod. Several hundred civilians were killed by Israeli troops, including 80 machine-gunned inside Damashmask. My brother was shot in his leg and his head. Someone saw his jacket beside a dead body and thought it was my brother. We went back, sadly, to Deir Amar and mourned his death. Then we heard rumors, and my grandfather went secretly to Ramla to look for him. He discovered that my brother was still alive in Ramla. That day we had a party. We were so happy.
The population of Israel-Palestine is divided about half and half, Jews and Palestinians. Yet through most of my life, would you believe I did not have one Palestinian friend, acquaintance, or neighbor. The Palestinians were on the dark side of the moon. I lived in Jerusalem, where 40% are Palestinians. They are residents, not citizens. I saw Palestinians cleaning the streets, planting flowers to beautify my city, and washing dishes in restaurants. But I really did not see them. A deep fear has been instilled in our veins. There is no need for formal segregation in Israel. It is implied perfectly by this fear. 2 completely separate entities. This is a perfect way to dehumanize the other. They become demons, and you keep out of their space. Do you know that in Jerusalem city maps, Palestinian neighborhoods are blank, as if they don't exist?
Why? Why was the tiny charm of the map of Palestine such a major transgression? Why was the response to it so uncompromising? Why were we made to suffer? Well, it's simple. It wasn't just a gold map. It was all that it represented. My mother, an ordinary Palestinian who had been dispossessed and living in exile for 15 years at that point, had stubbornly held on to her connection to her homeland. Not only that, she had successfully passed on her passion to return home to her children. And if that is the case, if Palestinians generation after generation are going to remember their past and demand recognition of their identity, well then how could Israel go about its business of denying the existence of Palestine? How could they create a Jewish state for only Jewish people on Palestinian land? How would Israel erase its legacy of colonialism and expulsion if those which it had colonized continued to resist and those which it had expelled continued to return?
I remember my life in the refugee camps. The UN gave all the students iron cups that we hung on our waists like prisoners. Each day we drank British milk and fish oil, and they sprayed us with DDT, a substance that is internationally prohibited for the severe damage caused to the nervous system. One day the UN gave all the kids in my school red shoes, except for me, because my feet were too big. So I kept going to school without shoes. My family moved from camp to camp in the Gaza Strip until we landed up in Jordan. I kept attending school in each city we moved to with UN camps. I always registered myself as my parents were sick and were too busy surviving. My brother, who was 14, decided to work construction in Jordan to bring us money. And once, he and a friend stopped in a cave to take a nap, and they left their donkeys outside. The Zionists saw the animals from a helicopter, and they shot the animals and my brother's friends. It was written in the Gaza News that my brother was killed. For a week, we were devastated, but it turned out that by some miracle he escaped, although his friends were killed. More than genes are inherited to offspring. The world can fabricate a lie and it gets inherited forever. The world is scared of the truth, and Arabs are hopeless.
I often think to myself, how would we feel here in America if suddenly an international body declared that Brooklyn was now a homeland for persecuted Armenians, let's say, and that we Brooklynites would have to leave our homes and give our jobs and livelihoods to the thousands of Armenians who have survived their Holocaust? And then we Brooklynites become residents, not citizens, and have to go through checkpoints to go to work, or we can't go to Coney Island to the beach because it's only for the newcomers. I think there would be strong resistance to this, and everyone would understand this resistance as justified. That is what's happening in Israel.
It has been hard work to examine my own mind. Many questions leave me wondering how I could have not thought about them. My solid identity has been shaken and I'm broken. I have been an eyewitness to the systematic oppression, humiliation, racism, cruelty, and hatred by my people toward towards the others.
Teta Abed, my grandmother, suffered from dementia in her old age. We didn't realize it for a long time because she was so good at hiding the fact that she was losing her memory. One night, sitting in Khalti Soha's house in Ramallah, my grandmother got up suddenly and said, it's late, I have to go upstairs. My father will be so upset if I don't go home. I have to go home. My grandmother's mind had taken her back to her childhood home. She was born in Safad, and she died in Safad. If only in her mind, she'd forgotten Safad was now out of her reach. It had been colonized by Israel in 1948. All she could remember is Palestine. None of us have forgotten. And although the Nakba started 70 years ago and continues to this day, we are still there. Palestine still exists. It is not an eradicated memory.
Thank you all.